Hello, welcome to part 2 of the battle for your soul. To recap, in part 1 we looked at the creation of the heavenly realm and the earthly realm by the Godhead. The Bible gives a lot of credit to Jesus, saying that by him and through him everything was created. So when he created them, they were created perfect, both realms, because it was like having two families, a heavenly family and an earthly family. So what he did is he created beautiful environments and everything for them to live in and to be happy in, and for him to be able to have fellowship with them. Remember, there's a lot of relationship when we talk about this. So what we're going to be talking about today is the falls or the rebellions. What happened that changed? There was a change in the heavenly environment, but especially what happened that was such a change in our earthly environment. For example, the Bible says that after God created the earth and everything in it, that it was good. It was very good. So why isn't that what we see today? Why do we see things decay and die? Why do we see murder and violence and slavery and so many injustices? Why is there human trafficking? I mean, these are not things that God would say were very good. So something happened, actually several things happened, which really changed the direction of what God wanted for this planet. And keep that in mind, because one of the things I always see happening is God gets the blame for everything bad that happens. However, remember, what he told man is, I am giving you dominion over the earth. So we have to look at ourselves many times. But it's not just us. What we're going to cover here is what were the multiple things that happen. Now, some of the information that I get here will not just be from the Bible. Some of it is going to come from a book that's called First Enoch. And so in it is given a little more explanation of some of the things that happen behind the scenes. It is not part of the Bible, but it is a book that the people who the Bible was written by and the culture and the people at that time would have understood about that book and certain things that were in it. And the book wasn't written for the United States. The Bible wasn't written for the United States, for our culture. So when we read the Bible, we don't always understand everything in it. So books like First Enoch help us to understand some of the things that the writers of the Bible knew that the people who would be reading it would have understood. But we don't understand it because we're not of that culture. Thank God that there are books that help us. Some other books which I'll be referencing are by Dr. Michael Heiser, The Unseen Realm, and also a book he has called Demons. He's a well-known biblical scholar. You can find him all over YouTube, who really has brought a lot of understanding to the regular folk like you and I. Things that are usually covered up at the university are covered in the university level. So he's really done us a favor by being able to take that very intellectual information and bring it down into terms that we can understand. So let's get started. So we see here in this diagram the multiple rebellions that took place against God, because that is really what it comes down to. They are rebellions against God. We'll cover each one of these one by one, but here you can kind of see an overview of them, and that there were several. Okay, so the first one we're going to cover will begin with the rebellion in the heavenly realm. So we're going to start with Lucifer. Now, what I'll be covering today is pretty much what is common understanding. Even if we have something wrong. For example, I'm going to cover two passages in the Old Testament where it talks about a fallen being. Even if instead of the same, they're different. What I want you to keep in mind is the idea of this. And so this idea means that there are high level beings which were in heaven. So they're much more brilliant than we are. They understand God at a whole different level, have been around for thousands of years, and we don't even know actually how many. Maybe it's even tens of thousands of years. And that is what we are up against in the battle for our soul. So the first one we're going to cover is the one everybody pretty much knows of is Lucifer. So I'm going to do some reading from the Bible. And what I'll be doing is explaining it as we go. So this is from the King James Version. So this is Isaiah 14:12 is where we will start. And it says, "How are you fallen from heaven, O Lucifer, son of the morning?" Son of the morning is another one of saying like morning star or one who brings light. It says, "How are you cut down to the ground, you who weaken the nations?" Now I want you to think about that. Again, he didn't just say you who weakened a man here or a woman there. We notice that Lucifer, this being that he's talking about who has fallen, deals at a national level. So when we're looking at some of the things that he does in our world, we're talking countries, we're talking nations, we're talking global. So keep that in mind. It says, "For you have said in your heart, I will ascend into heaven. I will exalt my throne above the sons of God. I will also sit on the mount of the congregation on the farthest sides of the north. I will ascend above the heights of the clouds. I will be like the Most High." So what do you see in these statements? There's a lot of I. Everything is the I, which usually comes down to pride. So it's this arrogance. We hear this coveting, wanting what is not his. We see envy, and we see that he kind of sets his heart. You can really hear that determination of this is what I want and this is what I'm going to get. However, it sounds like what he wanted was already occupied by another being, which would be God. Maybe it was Jesus' throne he wanted. I'm not sure, but he wanted something that was above what he was created to have. So let's find out a little more about him. In Ezekiel 14, again in the King James Version, when that chapter starts, you'll see that it's talking, it's basically a prophet, Ezekiel. And what a prophet was somebody who God would speak to them, and then they would say what God has said, either to another person, to a country, or about a country. So in this case, it starts with Ezekiel speaking the words of God that God has said over the prince of Tyre. However, once we get down to about verse 12, it changes to the king of Tyre. And so what they believe is happening here is that the king is really Satan or Lucifer or the devil, multiple names. And he's the real power behind the prince. So again, it's like looking at our government officials and especially, let's say, kings, presidents, ministers, and seeing the real power behind them versus just the position that we see. So again, you see his political working in on a national level, global too, because this wasn't Israel. So it says, Lamentations for the king of Tyre. It begins at verse 12. Chapter 14. It says, "Son of man, take a lamentation for the king of Tyre, and say to him, Thus says the Lord God, you were the seal of perfection." So what we're going to get here is an idea of a little more of what Lucifer looked like. "You were in the Garden of Eden. Every precious stone was your covering." And then it goes on to list a bunch of precious stones. "The workmanship of your timbrels and pipes was prepared for you on the day you were created." This has a reference to music. So what we see so far is he was beautiful. All kinds of precious stones and everything were his covering. And I remember he was created. And it talks about here the timbrels and the pipes. So some people believe that he had a part of his responsibility was worship, that he would lead worship. So I want you to think of when he got kicked out of heaven, I'm sure there were changes in terms of maybe his appearance and certain things he could do, but he still retained, I'm sure, many of his talents. So what we see here is one of his talents is in music. Think about the effect that music can have to sway us. Music can be used to bring you down and calm you. It could be used to excite you. It could even be used let's say, to bring about violence. It could be used to make you do things or entice you to do things that you shouldn't be doing. And so when we look at who's behind a lot of music that is not for good purposes, we see here it's this being. It says, you were the anointed cherub who covers. I established you. This is God talking. You were on the holy mountain of God. You walked back and forth in the midst of fiery stones. You were perfect in your ways from the day you were created till iniquity was found in you. By the abundance of your trading, you became filled with violence within, and you sinned. Now, I was using a book by Derek Prince called Lucifer Exposed, the Devil's Plan to Destroy Your Life. And he knew Hebrew, Greek, and everything. He was a very educated man. And what he was saying is when you look at that word trading, its definition was to go up and down as a talebearer, gossiper, an agitator with a secret, underhanded agitation. And I thought it was kind of funny. Some other words which were used for it were campaigning or lobbying. He flatters and lies to get angels and people to do what he wants. Now this can also mean a slanderer, somebody who slanders somebody else. They lie about somebody else. They ruin their reputation. They cause disloyalty. And one of the tools that they use is flattery and misrepresenting authority. So I want you to think about this because it mentions trading actually more than once. So in his trading, so here Lucifer has gotten to the point where he really feels that he should be like the Most High. He should be worshipped. He should have a throne. He should have even more authority than he currently has. And so I'm sure God knew that it was going on, and he's kind of letting it play out. So now we can imagine Lucifer going around and then going to other angels. And let's say if it was warrior angels, because different angels have different functions. And he starts telling this angel, again, flattery, what a brave angel he is, and that about his battle strategies and the authority he commands. Well, if I were God or if I were in charge, I would give you a higher position. And then he would say things like, I don't think God really realizes or appreciates you the way he should. So see how somebody like that can start to plant thoughts. They plant thoughts, and then the person, or in this case the angel, becomes discontent. Where before he might have been contentedly serving God, now he starts to feel a little bit discontent and like, yeah, he's right. So then he goes another one. Maybe there are certain angels, again, other angels of music. So he tells them the same thing. They're not being appreciated. God's not realizing their full power. God's holding them back. But if he were in charge, he would do this with them. So as many different jobs or functions or ministries as there were in heaven, he could probably go around to every single group because he's already planning his army, who's going to be his following. So as smart as he is, I'm sure that he looked and he wanted all kinds of angels of all kinds of functions. And again, not just angels in the way we think, but there were many created beings, as we covered in part 1. And many we still don't know about. So what happened? These angels aligned themselves with Lucifer. And so whatever was going to happen to Lucifer was going to happen to them. So let's continue in Ezekiel. It says, therefore I cast you as a profane thing out of the mountain of God. He was cast out, and those who followed him out of the mountain of God. And I destroyed you, O covering cherub, from the midst of the fiery stones. Your heart was lifted up because of your beauty. Pride. You corrupted your wisdom for the sake of your splendor. So then it goes on saying that he laid him down to the ground. I laid you before kings that they might gaze at you. You defiled your sanctuaries by the multitude of your iniquities, by the iniquity of your trading. Here goes that trading again. Therefore I brought fire from your midst. I devoured you, and I turned you to ashes upon the earth in the sight of all who saw you. All who knew you among the peoples are astonished at you. You have become a horror and shall be no more forevermore. So when I read that, I kind of got confused because I thought, does that mean he is no more? Is he destroyed? However, we can see that in different parts of the Bible that no, he still is there. So this might be talking about the same kind of thing like with Adam when he told him that he would die if he ate from the fruit. But we saw that he did eat from the fruit, but the death didn't come till later. But there was a huge change. It was a death of something. So here we see that again, he was cast down and he was punished. Now Jesus in the book of Luke 12:18 says, I saw Satan falling from heaven as a flash of lightning. So he was cast out. So what I want you to think of here is the first rebellion. A very powerful being who is cast down to the earth with we don't know how many other beings. It doesn't give us a number. You'll notice another thing is the Bible doesn't really tell us time periods. It focuses more on the fact that the event happened. So what we know now is there is a very intelligent, high-level being with other beings who is probably now hating God. And if he hates God, he's going to hate anything to do with God, which would include us and the earth that God has created. We see that he works on a national level. So I'm sure that we'll get to later when we talk a little more about demons, these low-level demons, which are the ones that try to usually entice us to do things. But there are created beings who are kicked out of heaven who are working on a national level. So I want that to really sink in. When we see certain national things going on, we can't just always say, well, that's just, somebody who's not very bright in office or this and that. It might just look at the power many times behind what is happening. Think about communist countries. Think about countries where people are being starved. And there's several countries out there like that right now. One that is very close to where I live is Cuba. And he came in, when Castro came in, he came in with promises of what he was going to give the people, how good things were going to be for them. When they helped him to gain power, that didn't happen at all. So now you have a nation which hasn't advanced, which he kept under his thumb, because who was probably the power behind him? That would be Satan. And Satan never, ever, ever wants what is good for us. So that's the first rebellion, the first fall, Lucifer. Rebellion number 2, or fall number 2, we're going to look at it happening on earth, but it's also a combination between the two realms. So we're going to see here the effect that Lucifer is going to have on earth. Now remember, he is familiar with the garden. We just read a scripture talking about that he's been in the garden. And it seems that the garden is probably something that where the two realms possibly meet, or there's some kind of close relationship. So he knows a lot of things that have happened. He knows that man has dominion. He knows that if he can get man to go against God, then because God is a just God, there will have to be some kind of punishment. Something will have to change. So what does he know so far, and what do we know so far of Genesis, is that when it was created, God gave them one rule, just one rule to follow, that they were not to eat from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. It actually even says, for the day you eat of it, you will surely die. That's a Genesis 2:17 paraphrase. So think about it. So at this point, Satan and his accomplices have been removed from heaven. They're probably very angry, or at least in a rage. Because think about that, even if you were one of the angels who Satan talked you into it, who you let him entice you, And now you see the result of that is that you weren't successful in taking over the throne, but instead got kicked out and possibly lost maybe your covering or something that was on you. You're not too happy right now. So Satan is going to have a battle strategy, because he's got this whole army now that he also needs to keep on his side, because he is the leader of all of this. He did it through, again, the way he talks. So what do we know? The Bible tells us that he came as a snake. There are other interpretations that say that he came in kind of like a different form, or like a shining one. So we're not really sure how he came, but we're going to go with as a serpent. Because again, those details aren't necessarily super important. What's really important is what is it that happened. Okay. So what do we know? Again, he's very persuasive. Now, he cannot just go down, take whatever the fruit is, we don't know what it is, and shove it into Adam's mouth and make him chew. He has to get them, Adam and Eve, to willingly go against God. So the tool that we're going to see him use is the one that he still uses to this day. And that is conversation. His way of using his words, his way of enticing. So I'm going to be reading in Genesis 3. It says, "Now the serpent was more cunning than any beast of the field which the Lord God had made. And he said to the woman, Has indeed God said, You shall not eat of every tree of the garden." So notice there that this is a misquoting. God says you can eat of all of these trees except. And here now we see Lucifer, the devil, doing a twisting of the language. You shall not eat of every tree of the garden. So again, through conversation, through causing confusion, through word play. Words are very important. Words are very important, okay, and their meanings. And the woman said to the serpent, We may eat of the fruit of the trees of the garden, but of the fruit of the tree which is in the midst of the garden, God has said, You shall not eat it, nor shall you touch it, lest you die. So she knew that that tree was different, and that she's been told, do not eat that one. Now, an interesting thing here is this conversation is happening with Eve. Was that on purpose? Did the serpent wait till Eve was alone? Or was it just going to be a matter of whether it was Adam or Eve? So it's interesting which one. Did he know that he was going to use Eve to then get to Adam? Again, he is a master manipulator. Master manipulator. Genesis 3 verse 4. Then the serpent said to the woman, You will not surely die. God knows that in the day you eat of it, your eyes will be opened, and you will be like God, knowing good and evil. So now he's flat out coming against it. So now he's calling God a liar, because he's saying, you will not surely die. God said you would die, but you're not going to die. Which then, what does that do? That makes God a liar. Remember, part of this trading is you cause disloyalty, especially to the authority. So he's calling God a liar, and he's planting in her the idea that God is holding back on her. And this happens to us all the time. But what I want you to think of, she should have kind of stepped back and say, everything is really good. God's been really good to me. Would he lie? I need to go ask him about this. That's what we wish would have happened, that she would have gone and asked him about it. But instead, what did she do? She started to think about the words that the serpent has said, and now she's entertaining them. Very bad idea. So once you start entertaining those ideas in your head, you start to become convinced of them. So when the woman saw, this is verse 6, that the tree was good for food, there were, let's remember, there were other trees to eat from. It's not like she's starving, okay? That it was pleasant to her eyes. This is like the lust of the eyes. It looked good. She wanted, because now she's really checking it out. And that it was a tree desirable to make one wise. She took of its fruit and ate. So what do we have there? What do we have stepping in? Pride. It's almost like pride always seems to come in. The Bible says that pride comes before the fall. Lucifer was prideful before he fell. Now Eve became prideful. And now she's going to fall. And also we see their lust. But what is it that she wanted? She's like, boy, that tree looks good for food. Even though I have other food, it sure looks nice. It was pleasant. It was pretty. And it was going to make me wise. So this is what she's thinking of now. Apparently God's been holding back on me in terms of giving me more wisdom. So I'm going to get it myself. I'm going to take matters into my own hands. What is that? That's a mistrust of God. Everything that we see here is still going on with us today. So she gave it to her husband and he ate. Our question is, why did he go along? What was supposed to have happened is he should have put an end to it right there and said, no, what you're doing is wrong. I will not go along with it. And then they would have handled the matter with God. But instead, he went along and ate also. Maybe he knew on some level something was going to happen to her and he loved her so much that he didn't want to lose her. We don't really know, but he did go along. Instantly, it says, well, maybe not instantly, but it says, then the eyes of both of them were opened and they knew that they were naked and they sewed fig leaves together and made themselves coverings. Something changed. So as soon as they disobeyed, something changed. One school of thought says that they may have had a covering on them and that once they disobeyed, this covering was lost and then they actually could see that they were naked. We don't know. So what happened? They listened to Satan and what was good became bad. And that is a theme that is until the end of this age. If you listen to Satan, something bad's going to happen. He never, ever, ever is for your good. Even if you work for him. Because there's people who are Luciferians and they worship Satan. And just like he promised the angels what he could not deliver, maybe temporarily could deliver, he does the same thing with humans. So even if you're a human and you've given yourself over to Luciferianism, to Satanism, it is not for your good. He is just using you. Okay? So when God came to the garden in the cool of the day, they hid themselves from him. So here was probably a situation where when God would come to talk with them at the cool of the day, they probably ran out there and it was great and everybody's happy. But instead now they hid. So now they're hiding from the one who's always been good to them, from the one who wanted them as family, from the one who created a perfect environment. Because they listened to the deceiver, they were now hiding from the one that was good. So when God asked them if they had eaten from the tree, God knows. He knew. And it's funny because lots of times he kind of comes with these questions. Adam then says, well, the woman that you gave me gave it to me, kind of pushing the blame there. And then the woman said that the serpent tricked me. So it seems like nobody was really taking responsibility. Now the issue is that God is a just God. He cannot just have iniquity or sin around him. So just like Satan knew, there would have to be something would need to change. Something would happen. So what happens is God does call down what we could call a curse upon them or a punishment upon them. There were a couple, but I'm going to focus on the main ones for the purpose of this. And so one of the main ones, he says that he would put enmity, hatred, fighting between the woman and the serpent, between her seed and his seed. So that's interesting, isn't it? Now we know that the woman is going to have more seed because they're going to be multiplying on the earth. But who is Satan's seed? Does Satan end up with a creation? Is Satan today somehow multiplying or creating things that will follow him? Remember, he is smart, okay? And he can use science. So what he said is that her seed would bruise the serpent's head, and the serpent would bruise her seed's heel. So the bruise to the head would be more serious. So if you're thinking in battle tactics, what do you want to do? Let's do something about this seed. Because what he's saying is that there would be a man which would come from a woman who is going to hurt Satan, and I guess his kingdom. And Satan would hurt him, but not as bad, or at least not as permanently. What do we have here? This is a declaration of war. The battle lines are now drawn. Now we officially have war, and we have each kingdom in on it. So now Satan's goal is going to be to try to target any possible seed before it targets him. And as we get to some future stories, we're going to see where he does things like has somebody in the world, usually a ruler, kill off babies, kill off toddlers who might be that seed. He doesn't care. You think Satan looks at a baby and says, oh, how cute? No, he doesn't. He hates. He's full of hate. And he's had thousands of years to dwell in this hate. So he's kind of really very unstable, full of rage, very dangerous. The Bible even says he goes around like a roaring lion looking for whom he may devour. Satan goes around just looking for somebody to destroy, looking for somebody to devour. Not good. So it seems that when this happened now, that some authority was given over to Satan. Because if we look at some of his authority on earth, on some of the things that said, it says, like even Jesus calls Satan the prince of this world. In Ephesians 2:2, Paul calls him the prince of the power of the air. In 2 Corinthians 4:4, he is called the God of this world. Now this doesn't mean that he is higher than the creator, but it does mean that he has authority on earth. However, God is always mightier, but Satan has a legitimate authority on this earth. So the only way to not be under his authority, as we're going to see in upcoming lessons, is to be under the authority of Jesus. That is the only way. You're either under one authority or the other, no neutral. So, as we look at the flow chart again, we see now that there have been 2 rebellions so far. 2 rebellions. And now we're going to get to the next one. We are on rebellion number 3. Now this one is a little bit more unusual, so I'm going to read it from the Bible. This is Genesis 6:1-2. And it came to pass when men began to multiply on the face of the earth, and daughters were born unto them, that the sons of God saw the daughters of men, that they were fair, and they took them wives of all which they chose. So what are we saying here? And sometimes the sons of God, they call them watchers. But the sons of God at this point would still be angelic type beings. So here they are, the people are multiplying on the earth now, and they see them, they see what's going on earth, and they see the women, and they see that the women are beautiful, and they are attracted to them. They are physically attracted to them. So they came and they took wives of all which they chose. In Genesis 6:4, there were giants in the earth in those days, and also after that, when the sons of God came in unto the daughters of men, and they bare children to them. The same became mighty men which were of old, men of renown. Okay, so what are we seeing here in this unusual passage? We're seeing that what it's saying is that angelic beings saw women, were attracted to them, and ended up coming to the earth and taking these women and having sexual relationships with them. So again, it says they took them as wives. So whether it was wives, multiple, whatever, we don't know the details. But what you have here which is forbidden, and it's still forbidden, is you have somebody on earth having sexual relations with a heavenly being, or what we could say a purely spiritual being. So that is not to be, and so we see that happened here. Now, the book of Enoch goes into more detail on this, so I'm going to be giving some extra input on that. But what it does say here in the Bible is that the children that they had were considered giants. So, and that they were men of old, men of renown. That would be a way of saying that they were very well known, they were famous. But they are what we would call hybrids, half human, half heavenly being. And if you think about mythology, how much of mythology actually basically says that same thing, where you'll have this being which was from the gods and also a human being. And they would usually have special powers. They would be stronger, faster, or something like that. But in this case, it says that they were giants. So when we think of giants, we don't know exactly how tall that would be. But think about David and Goliath. So a story later on in the Bible in 1 Samuel, where you have a teenager, David, who with a slingshot is able to bring down a giant named Goliath. When I did try to look it up, it says that Goliath could have been anywhere from 6'9" to 9'9". And he wasn't the only giant around at the time. And again, there's many differing views on this. Now, some people say that this passage does not mean that at all, that these were it was the line of Seth, but no, because it was okay for a human to be with a human. So when you read something unusual in the Bible, you can't just write it off by saying, oh, no, that can't be, that's too odd, that's too strange, this is the Bible. And remember, the Bible is supposed to be telling us and informing us about this other realm that exists. So everything is not just going to be what we can explain away by human terms. If you believe the Bible, if you are depending on it for your salvation, then you need to believe everything that's in the Bible. And you can't just go and pick and choose. So this is kind of like one of those passages where you have to say, well, that does seem to be what it's saying. Okay? Now, what happens here is in the book of Enoch, it goes into more detail, but what happened is that these angels, we can call them now fallen angels, who were cohabiting with women, and now people were teaching them things that they knew from heaven. And so they were teaching things that they weren't supposed to know. This was heavenly knowledge. And what kind of stuff was it? They taught people tools for warfare, potions and drugs for altered states, the art of seduction, astrology, and idolatry. So what we could probably look at and say, and like what Dr. Michael Heiser says, they took evil to a different level. Had the fall just been the Garden of Eden and what happened there, the world might not be as evil as it is. But what you had here was now, evil was now taught to people. Things that they weren't supposed to know were now taught to people. And I mean, look at it. One of the tools was warfare. So what happens then is that people became more evil. So if we go back to Genesis 6, in verses 5 and 6, it says, "And God saw that the wickedness of man was great in the earth, and that every imagination of the thoughts of his heart was only evil continually. And it repented the Lord that he had made man on the earth, and it grieved him at his heart." So when God sees what's going on, it grieves him. Because again, here he created this earthly family to fellowship with. He wanted good for them. And now he looks down upon the earth, and you have these extra tall beings running around, which are hybrids. You have these beings that were his who were now having relations with the women. You had people learning and practicing things that they weren't supposed to know. So, and when you read again in First Enoch and some of the other books that talk about things like the giants, these giants were, again, or if you want to call them these very tall people, these hybrids, were very evil and started to just consume everything around them. They were wild. They were like wild children. But again, they were loved by their fathers, the angels, who now I guess wanted their own. So there, according to the book of Enoch, there was a lot of bloodshed. So now things were so bad on earth that the people cried out to heaven, and God had to do something about it. So what did he do? And again, when God needs something done, many times he sends his angels. In the book of Enoch, he sends some of his angels to lock up these angels who had fallen and cohabited with women. So they are now locked up for, I think, a certain amount of time. And it says that in Jude 1:6 in the New Testament, it talks about this. So it can't just be like, oh, that's just crazy stuff in the Old Testament. So in Jude 1:6, which is in the New Testament, it says, and the angels who did not keep their positions of authority, but abandoned their proper dwelling, which would have been heaven, these he kept in darkness, bound with everlasting chains for judgment on the great day. Jude 1:6. So here, even in the New Testament, it's confirmed. And it's something that people knew about in those days. Again, when the Bible was written by the people it was written by, there was common knowledge. Things like the book of Enoch were very accepted. First Enoch was very accepted. And so what did it do? It helped explain certain things. So some people might say, oh, but you should never go to anything but outside the Bible. I'm not saying that First Enoch is part of the Bible. But what it does, it helps us know where their thinking was. For example, if somebody if somebody reads something that I write in my diary, and I'm saying something like, on Saturday, I went to the farmer's market and purchased some vegetables. And they're in the future and they're like, what's a farmer's market? By reading something like a dictionary, reading other things that were written in this time period, they could see what a farmer's market was and why somebody would go there and buy vegetables. Enoch is kind of like, it was very well respected. It helped to explain many of the things that people of that day believed. So when the people who were writing the Bible were writing certain things, they didn't bother to explain it. They didn't define everything because they're like, well, people know what this is. First Enoch, it explains it. So what do we have? The earth is evil and out of control. So this is the point where God decides to send the flood to clean it up. So he does find a righteous man named Noah and his family. He has them, this is the famous story of Noah and the ark. He has them build an ark, which took a long time to build. When the time was right, him and his family, which was 8 people, and the animals went into the ark. The ark is closed by God, and then the flood and the flood waters begin. So imagine Noah making this, and people would be like, what is it? Because it had to have been huge. So what did we have there? We had God and clean up everything. Apparently the hybrids were so bad, they were probably everywhere, that he just had to clean things up. The scary thing is, it says that they would be back. Because remember, they had a spirit. So now we're ready for our 4th rebellion. So what had happened? So with the flood, now we're going to have 8 people who are going to multiply and fill the earth. Now I am going to be referring to some information that I read in Antiquities of the Jews in Book 1, Chapter 4, where it referred to some of what happened at this time. And this was by Josephus, which was a historian. So imagine you're getting off the ark and there's 8 people, because you had Noah and his wife, and then you had 3 sons, and each one of them was married. And they are now supposed to populate and kind of like start things all over again. God still wants people to populate the earth. He still wants, a human family to do well and take care of the earth. So I'm going to read kind of what happens a while after that. So what I want you to picture is that each of these couples had children. They began to multiply on the earth. And actually, in Genesis 10, it tells you who a lot of the descendants were. So you can read there a lot of how they came to be. But I'm going to be reading now from chapter 11 in Genesis. So I'm going to read from the chapter. It says, at one time, the whole world spoke a single language and used the same words. Because again, they were all the same group of people. As the people migrated eastward, they found a plain in the land of Babylonia and settled there. They began to talk about construction projects, like let's build. Come, they said, let's make great piles of burnt brick and collect natural asphalt to use as mortar. Let's build a great city with a tower that reaches to the skies, a monument to our greatness. Here we're back at pride, aren't we again? It doesn't even take much time. So again, they weren't trying to do something to honor God. They said, let's build something as a monument to our greatness. This will bring us together and keep us from scattering all over the world. So what did they want? They wanted to stay there. They wanted to stay together. They didn't want to be scattered. Now, according to the antiquities of the Jews, God had, I'll read it straight from there. God also commanded them to send colonies abroad for the thorough peopling of the earth, that they might not raise seditions among themselves. So he didn't want them fighting among themselves. He's like, spread out, go to other places. But might cultivate a great part of the earth and enjoy its fruits after a plentiful manner. So what did we see again? The heart of God. Go out, multiply, spread out. There's a lot of great stuff out there. Think about it. There were mountains, there were deserts, there were valleys, there was oceans, there were seas. There was all kinds of beautiful things for them to see. So he didn't want them just sticking in one place. Now back to chapter 11. It says, but the Lord came down to see the city and the tower the people were building. Look, he said, if they can accomplish this, when they have just begun to take advantage of their common language and political unity, just think of what they will do later. Nothing will be impossible for them. Come, let's go down, give them different languages, then they won't be able to understand each other. In that way, the Lord scattered them all over the earth, and that ended the building of the city. This is why the city is called Babel, because it was there that the Lord confused the people by giving them many languages, thus scattering them across the earth. So what did we see? God told them, scatter, multiply, go explore, put lots of people on the earth. And they said, no, we're not going to listen to you. We're going to stay here together. We're going to build this city out of bricks, and we're going to build this very high tower, and this is going to be a monument to our greatness. Another rebellion, another going against God. Now, what's interesting is this character named Nimrod. So the Bible tells us very little about him, but in Genesis 10:8, it does say that he began to be a mighty one in the earth. When I looked at the antiquities of the Jews, it says that he was kind of like a leader, like a world leader. And what he wanted to do was keep them together. So he was discouraging what God had said, which was them spreading apart. He actually wanted to kind of like almost be tyrannical. Now, according to this book, it said, quote, he also said, this is Nimrod, he would be revenged on God if he should have a mind to drown the world again, for that he would build a tower too high for the waters to be able to reach, and that he would avenge himself on God for destroying their forefathers. So Nimrod, who was the leader, was actually against God. he was mad at God for the flood and for destroying their forefathers. So he says, you know what? We're going to build a tower so high that if God decides to do another flood, this tower is going to be taller and he's not going to be able to do anything about it. We're going to actually go above what he can flood. Not a good attitude, and it didn't work well for them. So instead of them spreading out, they all spoke the same language. They stuck together. God says, you know what? I'm going to give them different languages. So that confused everything. Now they couldn't communicate. And so what did they do? They started spreading out. They stopped building the tower and they started spreading out and building colonies all over. So God will have his way. In the end, God has his way. And especially when his way is for their good. Had they all stuck together, from what it seems that this ruler Nimrod was like, they would have all ended up under his rule. And that would not have been a good thing. Okay, now we are on our final rebellion. Rebellion number 5. This one, where I got this information, because it was not something that I saw in the Bible until I had read it, was Dr. Michael Heiser has written a book called The Unseen Realm. Now, if you go on YouTube and you put that in the search, Michael Heiser, Unseen Realm, you're going to get lots of information on this. So I'm going to cover it today. Again, it's not something that I'd ever really heard of before, but once I did hear it, I was like, yes, I could see that. That kind of makes sense. And that would give us our last rebellion. There's actually rebellions every day, but are major ones. So what had happened here now is God had told them to go out, right, and multiply. Now you see in chapter 10 where he lists all the descendants and basically what they call the table of nations. There's around 72 nations inside of there. And at this point, God had seen this constant rebellion. So he has what's called a divine council. Again, up in heaven, he's got beings of different rankings. And he's got like what you would call his, like kind of like his, you could say board of directors. Or yeah, probably like a board of directors. And so at this point, what he tells them is, I'm going to put you in charge. Each one of you in charge of different nations, different people groups. And I want you to rule them like I would. So you're going to be just. I want you to, let the people know my character and all. And what I'm going to do is I am going to pick this man named Abram. Okay? And through him, I'm going to have the seed is going to come out through Abram's line, the seed that we had talked about with the serpent, and a solution to this sin problem that we have on the earth. And all the nations of the earth are going to be blessed through this man and his descendants called Abram. We later will know him as Abraham. So what happens? Let me read you some of the scriptures. So Deuteronomy 32:8. Now some of the different Bibles say it a little differently. This is from the Living Bible. Deuteronomy 32:8. When the Most High assigned lands to the nations. So again, God gave the nations different lands. You see in the Bible that God is pro-nation. He's not into this global one world governing type of thing. One world order and all that. He's into nations having their boundaries, having their lands, doing their thing, as long as it's not against him. When the Most High assigned lands to the nations, when he divided up the human race, he established the boundaries of the peoples according to the number of angelic beings. That would be, the angelic beings would be like this group that he has, kind of, again, his board, or we could almost say like they kind of function like governors. They're given authority, but God is above them and they should be ruling in his way. But I think that's a pretty stunning scripture then, because we do see that God assigns land. God does divide the human race into nations. He does have boundaries for each one. So again, he's not into this globalism. Nations getting along, working together, yes. One nation, no. So what happened, unfortunately, but since they're in this category, is some of them began to fall. Some of these governors, some of these divine council members that he had put over to rule certain lands, it seems that they also began to fall. And it doesn't say it, but I would have to wonder, did Lucifer have anything to do with that? Did he start coming around and again, through that trading, through that talking, how they should be the God of that nation, that the people should bow to them and not to God and everything else. So it seems that some of them, we don't know how many, did succumb to that. And so in Psalm 82, you have this scenario of God talking to his council and basically saying that they have messed up. So let's see, that is Psalm 82. It says, God presides over heaven's court. He pronounces judgment on the judges. So what do we have here? It talks about this court. And now who's being judged here? It's the judges, which would be like that divine council. He says, how long will you judges hand down unjust decisions? How long will you shower special favors on the wicked? Then he goes on to talk about that they didn't take care of the poor and the orphan and the oppressed. They didn't rescue the poor and the helpless from evil people, which is what God wanted. Again, he always wants good for us. We're the ones who mess up. And so he's basically telling them, you have done bad. Now, again, it's God presides over heaven's court. This is not him talking to earthly people. In verse 6, again, Psalm 82, it says, I say you are gods and children of the Most High. It says, but in death you are mere men. You will fall as any prince, for all must die. And it says, rise up, O God, and judge the earth, for all the nations belong to you. So what have we seen here? We've seen multiple rebellions, 5 rebellions. Number 1 was Lucifer, when his heavenly fall. Then he influences the fall in the Garden of Eden. Okay. Then we have what they call the Watchers, or the sons of God, cohabitating with the women on the earth and creating these hybrids. Then we have, which is then cleaned out by the flood. Then we have Babel, where looks like under the tutelage of Nimrod, they decide to not listen to what God wanted. And Nimrod himself seems to be very against God. I'm going to build that tower that God will never be able to do this. I'll avenge himself for what happened to my forefathers. And then number 5, the last fall, would be the divine council. So if we look at this in a practical application, I want you to see that there are powers and principalities and all kinds of authorities which are set against human beings. War lines have been drawn. And so that means you and I come under attack by the demonic kingdom. Okay? We see Lucifer working at the level of nations. So things that happen in a worldwide scale, in our government scale, are many times led by him. But then we have, again, different authorities below them. We see things trying to become like God and wanting to be worshipped instead of God. So I think that what you should do is start to kind of look at things through those eyes and just see, when you start hearing the news, when you start seeing how the world works, just ask yourself, is that really true? Is somebody trying to trick me in what they're saying? If Lucifer is behind all of this, is there some angle to what he's saying? Is there something wrong with, will what he's saying lead to my destruction and the destruction of others? Because we see historically that's what he does. Everything he touches, he destroys. He's a liar. He's like a lion looking for whom he may devour. He's full of rage. He's full of hate at this point. So that ends this lesson. Now what we're going to look at in the next one is, remember, God said, I'm going to choose this man Abram. And that is the start of the Hebrew nation, the start of Israel. So we're going to take a look at what happened in that time period. What happened in that time period that was significant, and then again can teach us something that will relate to us today. Because everything in the Bible, or most things in the Bible, can relate to things today. This story has an end, and the end is written all throughout the Bible. So that ends this this talk, and so our next one we're going to look more at what happened after the flood.